Welcome to the Smart Connector podcast. I really have a very exciting guest for you today, Slater Victoroff. Welcome, Slater.
Thank you so much for having me, Jane.
So, Slater's the founder and chief technology officer of Indico, which is an enterprise AI solution for unstructured content that emphasizes document understanding. Now, he and his two co-founders have just been listed as leading Forbes under 30 enterprise technology leaders, which is really an amazing accolade. So congratulations, Slater.
Thank you so much. We're extremely proud and just excited for the honor.
Now, if you're not sure what all of that stuff that we talked about means, I invite you to hang on in there because Slater's a world-leading expert in data science, and he's been building machine learning artificial intelligence solutions for startups, governments, and Fortune 100 companies for the last 7 years. So there aren't many people who've amassed such a wealth of experience in this area like him. And he has so much wisdom to share with our audience. So I'm really looking forward to getting into it with him today. And Indico, his company, has recently also announced a $22 million Series B fundraise. So we're going to be talking a little bit about funding tech startups and what that $22 million is actually going to be used for. And we're also going to talk about AI and machine learning and what are the opportunities and the pitfalls and what startups and SMEs should be aware of in terms of its power. And of course, what the future looks like, because it's definitely it's the future, isn't it?
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah. So before we get into this, Slater, I'd just love to hear a little bit more about you. Where did you come from? How did you get into this exciting field? What is it that excites you and fires you up about it?
Absolutely. And I think, like most folks in the AI field, I took a path that wasn't particularly straight. It's a field that has kind of shifted so radically over the course of the last couple of years. I think you see quite a lot of folks that are either, impressive amateurs or, folks that just didn't take traditional paths, which is nice. It makes me feel kind of at home. So I grew up actually in Los Angeles primarily, but then I also split my time between there and sort of far north California in Humboldt County, which is a very different kind of a place if anyone's ever been there. And I grew up, I never owned my own computer, right? I didn't program a single line of code, right? I believe that entrepreneurship was a euphemism for unemployment, and I didn't realize there was anything else to it. All of that changed when I went to school. Being an 18-year-old, I needed to get as far away from my parents as possible. So I moved to the other side of the country. I went to Boston, Massachusetts, but I also really fell in love with a school out there, the Olin College of Engineering. So engineering specific school, but they do software and mechanical and electrical engineering. I actually thought I was going to be a chemical engineer. It turns out that Olin doesn't really have a chemical engineering program, which I learned only after I showed up because I didn't do quite enough research. But I also learned that chemical engineering was actually not really a path that was exciting to me from a macro perspective. It's the kind of thing where you're in school for another decade, right? And then you end up on an oil rig, in a best case scenario, 6 months out of the year. I'm like, maybe there's other stuff out there, right? And that was eventually how I found my way to software. Right, that's what everyone was interested in, right?
Yeah.
First, I just I kind of want a job, but it was really love at first sight once I started really digging into it.
Yeah, love at first sight. That's pretty good, isn't it? So what was it about love at first sight? What was it that you fell in love with?
Yeah, it was this notion that I remember back then, I had a kind of laptop, and I've always really liked these very light, sleek laptops, and it's this feeling that you can hold sort of this 2-pound piece of metal in your hands, and that you can create an empire with that, right, using nothing but your brain, right? There's kind of this moment, I think, where it really clicked for me, right, where I kind of got to the end of my first, introduction to programming book, and I'm like, all right, great, where's the advanced programming book? And one of the things that was super interesting is there isn't one, right? And that's not to say that there aren't continued books, but after you've learned sort of this pretty basic fundamentals, it's a lot of very specific subject areas very, very quickly. And that's one of the things that is so cool about being in a space that is so new, right? There's not 300 years of software that I've got to learn in order to meaningfully contribute. And I don't know, and it's such, I think, even for people that aren't going to be software developers in their lives, just learning a little bit of code, I think there is tremendous empowerment in that.
Mm. I don't really know code myself, but I agree that there is empowerment in that because it's the way the world is going, isn't it? Tech is ruling the world.
Oh, it's almost like magic from the outside, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of
Yeah.
magic, a lot of magic. I'm a great fan of tech. I mean, look, we wouldn't be doing this now without it, would we?
Right. No, I mean that's absolutely right. And I think it's one of the things that, unfortunately, even my school, right, really there was little to no opportunity to learn programming coming in through high school, right? The fact that I
Yeah.
had to wait till college to do that. And even that, I had to pursue a pretty specialized field of study to really get into it. And I think that, I really hope that that changes pretty dramatically in the
Mhm.
future. I think that I think even kids in elementary school, right? I think that programming is not an inherently difficult subject. We just happen to not introduce it to people effectively or earnestly, I think.
Yeah, and that's a very important point because I don't know what you think about this as a young person, but I certainly believe that the education system over here in the UK and probably in the rest of Europe is very antiquated, and they're not really equipping children for today, are they? I
You
mean,
know,
would
I,
you?
I I think your education system is significantly better than the one in the U.S. If
Uh-huh.
I and I still agree, right? And I think that in the U.S., for instance, I don't know. I guess there's probably a good amount of variation within Europe. I don't want to kind of consider it a monolith, but I know the Finnish system in particular, right? I think they've done some really amazing things in education and are turning into a bit of a model for the rest of the world. Um, but I think that education, a lot of the traditional education systems, they were just not meant to update particularly quickly. And
No.
you could look at a syllabus today, and it's not meaningfully different from a syllabus 1,000 years ago, which says something.
Yeah, it really does. All those subjects, history, geography. I mean, I find them all fascinating, but how important is it to learn communication skills and technology and entrepreneurship and all of those things that make people happy and successful today? There's no
I'm
place for it.
no, I'm a huge fan. I think the main issue is like a lack of self direction, right? Because
Yeah.
I agree. I don't think you can look at any one of those subjects and be like, oh, kids don't need to learn English or kids don't need to learn history. It's like, no, that's crazy, right? But I think the flip side, right, of I think before their undergraduate experience, right? Because that's the first time that we really give, at least in the US, right, kids the ability to choose, I want to take these classes and not these
Yes.
classes, right? And I think giving kids a lot more opportunity to do that significantly earlier in their education, not having such rigid standards, and a bigger diversity of kind of course load, I think that can only be positive. I think that can only be a benefit.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
definitely.
for just for instance, and because this ties back a little bit into how I got into AI. One area that I really really loved is so I think that the way language was taught in high school was like awful. I took French for 3 years and I didn't learn a damn thing. Right, I
Oh,
can't speak any French. Right, and I think
really?
a lot of people have that experience. Right, or like very vanishingly small amounts of it. Right. Um, and I think, but the flip side is that I absolutely loved linguistics, right? I
Mhm.
was so absolutely enamored with the idea of language, right? And so I would do these linguistics competitions that were, more logic puzzles and just understanding how language works. So it would be, a picture of an Armenian subway map and say reverse engineer the Armenian alphabet, right? So just like cool, fun stuff. But it was extracurricular, right? The opportunity I had to dig into linguistics on kind of the school side was really limited. But then extracurriculars, there were these like amazing, cool, in hindsight, relatively advanced things, right? Like a high schooler learning computational linguistics is not super standard, but that felt so much more approachable to me than sort of the standard, French course.
Wow. Honestly, it's a fascinating subject. I could talk about this all night, but I want to get back to you and what you're doing with Indigo. And how did you actually end up there? How did you form it? Where did you, what actually happened between you making that transition from high school to, well, we call it university or college or whatever, and then being where you are now? Because it hasn't
Absolutely.
been that long, has it?
No, it hasn't been that long. And Indico, actually started out of school, right? And so what happened was that actually first I got bit by the startup bug, right? I mean, that was kind of the first thing that had to happen is, Olin, my school had a really active entrepreneurship club, and I sort of met a couple of people there, and they really didn't fit my idea of an entrepreneur, right? Again, I'm coming from LA. I think an entrepreneur is unemployed. So I'm imagining these like schlubby, kind of don't have their stuff together people that say they're entrepreneurs. But what I see is the exact opposite. I see these people that are incredibly competent, right? Absolutely have this stuff together, doing a million things at once, going into the city every weekend, for business stuff, right? Not like partying, because I guess people do that as well. But that was the first kind of idea I had, that okay, maybe I've got this notion wrong. And I actually went my first internship. I couldn't get an internship with a Google or a Microsoft, but I did get one with this amazing startup, Alley that ended up being really, really important for me. And I sort of fell backwards into this AI project that, looking back, would eventually turn into Indico. Not that specific, but it kind of sparked this love of AI for me. And back then, the problem was, they had a whole bunch of video content, and the idea was they wanted to understand what video taught you what subject, and they had this really big learning taxonomy, right? So this teaches you about the Krebs cycle and photosynthesis, right? And this one teaches you about bones and red blood cells, for instance. And I'm like, there has to be a better way of doing this, because it was people watching these manually for hours and hours and hours at their desk. I didn't even realize at the time that this was an AI problem. But you start doing some research, and you learn pretty quickly that trying to do this kind of reasoning is very much in the realm of AI. So I built a nice system, which worked pretty well. And, I was kind of lucky enough to have some early success in the space. And then I, for various reasons, sort of the CEO of this company switched over, and the division I was in got shut down. I'm like, oh, great. The coolest thing I've ever built, now it's just going to sit on some shelf somewhere. And that was when actually I got approached by the person who would become my co-founder. So this is Alec Radford, and we started doing, and he's like, hey, I heard you're sort of an AI guy. I was like, yeah, I kind of like it, but I wasn't super into it at the time. But he kind of dragged me back in doing have you ever heard of Kaggle?
No.
So we started doing these Kaggle competitions together, and the structure of Kaggle, it was sort of these crowdsourced data science competitions. So companies come, they say, I've got this data set, I've got this problem. And whoever can get the best accuracy, predict, this particular task better than everyone else, they're going to win a cash prize. And you had, the top PhDs in the world, and, folks from industry on the very, very high end, all competing together in these open competitions. And it was really how we gained enough confidence and got enough sort of objective benchmarking to realize that not only was deep learning sort of a very, very impressive technology that we wanted to devote our lives to, right? But also that we were pretty good at this stuff, right? That we actually did have something here.
Yeah, and it's quite exciting that you can actually be a pioneer, because there aren't many things in the world that you can be pioneering at it, really. So it's new, isn't it?
It really is. I think specifically when we talk about these deep learning type techniques, machine learning as a space overall has been around for many years. But the thing that was really interesting is when you look at deep learning, the ideas are very old. I think, maybe the first time someone talked about a neural net was in the 60s, something like that, right?
Yeah.
But and there was a flash of excitement, and then it became very unpopular for a very, very long time, to the point where in 2012 there were really 3 universities in the world that still did research on this kind of AI. And now, this is like everything you hear about in the news, right? This is everything that, Google and Facebook and Amazon, kind of everything that you're building nowadays that touches text or touches, computer vision or self-driving cars, it's all built on deep learning. But this
Yeah.
was, 10 years ago, basically everyone had, myself included, had written off this field of study.
Yeah, so let's just get into, for people that don't know, because my audience, they're entrepreneurs from lots of different disciplines, and I know that they're all fascinated by this conversation that we're having today, because that will be why they're here. But what exactly is deep learning for people who have no idea?
Yeah. So, without, I can go on a long history lesson here, but I think the net of it, sort of the powers that we get from this modern AI, the best analogy I can use is it's sort of like a mirror, right? And the idea is that you're sort of programming this AI, if you will, with data, right? And this is kind of your representation. And
Yeah.
it is sort of this mirror that's then going to shine that back at you. It's not a perfect mirror, right? So it's got some holes and stuff. So maybe it'll ignore some bits of the data you show it. Maybe it'll really focus on some other pieces, right?
Mm.
But it's then going to kind of reflect that image, right? And then you have this kind of codified view, right? You can kind of repeat it, you can scale it up sort of immensely. But I think the key is that, it's not something that's totally autonomous, right? It's not like you just give it a bunch of stuff and say, go, tell me your ideas, right? It's not some objective arbiter of truth, right? It's something that you train very, very specifically to do a very specific task. And
Mm.
importantly, it's something that you already have to know how to do with a very high degree of kind of clarity and confidence around that.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because in a way, it's a relationship. It is, isn't it? Really.
I
Um,
absolutely. I think that one way that we often pitch ourselves, because I think that when you think about sort of the cultural view of AI, it's often like a cyborg that's next to you, that's
yeah.
analogous to a person in some way, right? And I don't think that's such a good view of AI. While I get why people view that, I much prefer this notion of a bionic arm, right? It's something where you're in control, you're telling it what to do. It's something that fits, a form that you're very comfortable with, you know how to use really, really effectively, right? And you're in control. It's just helping you do what you would be doing anyway, but much faster, much more efficiently, much
Mhm.
more, safely potentially.
Yeah, yeah. It's fascinating when you were talking because, of course, in popular culture, science fiction in particular, there's often this very sinister representation, isn't there, of the robots taking over, and like the Matrix and so on, and making everybody scared about the future. But that image that you just conjured up of the bionic arm is completely different, isn't it? It's like a helper, really.
I think that's right, and I love the Matrix, right? Absolutely no shade to be thrown on that, and I think from and I love science fiction, right? And I think that thinking about these implications is always very interesting. But one thing I always kind of point out is I think that there is real science fiction about real AI and real dangers that it poses, and I think Minority Report is a popular example I'd point to, right?
Yeah.
Predictive crime analytics, that is a thing that is happening, that could happen, that's got real ethical implications we should think through. And then I think about things where AI is really a stand-in for like genie in a bottle, right? And I think that's where we've got stuff like the Matrix, right? Terminator and Skynet, right? Where super super interesting ideas, extremely entertaining. And I could call that AI, or I could call that magical steampunk wizard, right? The movie is the same, right? They're not meaningfully differentiated concepts. Uh, and I think that's really the key, and that's kind of my view, right? Is I think that there's sort of the real AI, and I think there's sort of the science fiction, genie in a lamp kind of AI, right? That's more, it's almost aesthetic AI as opposed to real AI.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, I'd love to just get a little bit deeper into what you do at Indico and what
absolutely.
what exactly is Indico, and in a language that people who don't really understand this environment will be able to grasp.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we talk about that original impetus of wanting to make deep learning sort of this new technology that is just, it works in a more intuitive, obvious way than older versions of ML. We wanted
Yeah.
to really make that accessible to people. And now one of the big pluses of deep learning, right, is that it has this great simplicity of interaction. It learns by example, we say. So that's kind of where that mirror analogy comes from. You just have to show it what you want, and it's very, very good at reproducing that. Not something we were good at doing previously. However, usually the amount of data you need to give it for it to learn how to make kind of that copy, it's huge, right? It's millions of examples, right? Very, very expensive to create that, almost impossible to create that for most use cases, right? And so that was kind of the drawback. And there were other drawbacks as well, in a lot of things that meant that while this technology had amazing promise, it was still very inaccessible, very difficult for people to use. And that's really what Indico does, right? Is we make this technology more accessible. We present it to people in a way that is empowering, right? And it's actually a kind of fundamentally different model than most of the people in the industry have taken. And the way that we do that, right, to get really, really specific, if we just take a use case, right? Let's say that you want to do contract analysis, right? Let's say that you're a big company, you've got 1,000 contracts with 1,000 different customers, right? And you're looking for a particular clause, or say you've got these with 10,000 customers, even, right? You're looking for a particular clause, and if that clause is present, you've got to do one thing. If it's not, you've got to do another thing. Today, you have a lot of really highly paid lawyers that are going to go through in an extremely manual way every single document, right? Find not only just where can they find a clause, but where they can't find a clause, they have to go through with a fine-tooth comb, right?
Yeah.
Make sure it's not there.
Yes. Okay.
Right.
Yes, I get
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And then, so the idea is instead of doing that in a super manual way, they load those documents into our product, right? They sort of start the process the way they would normally, but then the AI sort of jumps up and says, hey, I think I kind of understand what you're doing. Let me help. And then they're sort of doing it in this assistive way. And then, pretty soon to the point where the AI is really doing the vast majority of the work. The human is just like, yep, that looks right. Yeah, yes, you reviewed those 10 correctly, kind of thing.
Yeah, so people have been talking for many years about how professional service businesses like accountancy and lawyers and so on are going to be shrinking in the future because of AI. Now, what you're talking about there is almost more to do with them being empowered and having almost like an assistant, so they don't have to do those long hours, so they can do their work better and maybe in a shorter space of time, and maybe that means that there will be savings for their clients. And so I can see that there could be a lot of benefits. As I said, from the way that it's been described to me in the past, I've just thought, oh, these people are all going to be unemployed. It's not quite like that, is it?
I think that's exactly right. And I think you're correct on all fronts there, right? That is how people think about it. Or rather, I think that is how people often portray it, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's people both portraying that in a negative way. They're like, obviously, this is not how we want this implementation to work. I think there's people also implementing that in kind of the very Machiavellian positive way of like, oh yeah, we're going to cut heads. Isn't that going to be so great? But I also think you're fundamentally right. I think like manufacturing, right? Even in the US, right, where we look at, the extreme automation that's happened in manufacturing, we are manufacturing more today in the US than we ever have in the past, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't realize that, is that you actually see a dramatic increase in the scope of sort of jobs being created, right? I think you see an increase in employment, and not only an increase in employment, but I think you see the face of work changing really dramatically, right?
Yeah.
To sort of a motion of work that I think is more encouraging. Empowering, I think, is exactly the right word, right? So the idea here, let us turn AI into a tool that is going to make your life better, and you're gonna. And that's not for some definition that we came up with, right? We don't know
Yes.
your life. We don't know what is going to make it better. We're going to put the tool in your hands so that you can tell us, what's going to make your life better.
Yeah, and I think that really is fascinating because it is about making life better, and it is about providing more choice, and it's just change, isn't it? It's just change, and I think people fear change, but there's not
Mhm.
really any reason for them to always fear change, is there?
I mean, I think that's right. I think that when people fear change, I think they often ignore the cost of the status quo. And so one example, document processing is very, very common for us. Is people people often point at AI and they say, well, how am I possibly going to understand what this is doing? And, obviously you've got a lot of metrics. There's actually a lot of tools to understand what's happening. But people rarely stop to think, well, how well do I understand the current human process that's happening today? We had a presentation once where, we had a company we were working with and they were a reverse mortgage company. And, there's this really big stack of documents that you file when you're applying for a reverse mortgage that says, hey, give me this big loan. And this is the home, that I'm putting up as equity. And they have this 12-step process that they're supposedly following for each stack of documents. So they give us a stack of documents. We go through, we build the models, we sort of analyze it, we come back, we say, okay, we went through all of your documents and we found, of what you gave us, 7% of them are not up to your standards. And the room goes silent, right? And we're here thinking, like, wasn't this intentional? We assumed you were kind of testing us by giving us some documents that would fail. And then the CEO is in the room and he turns and he says, what documents did we give them? And they say, these are all approved documents.
Yeah.
And I think that just kind of goes to show, right, is often people aren't realizing, what's slipping through the cracks, right? Oftentimes I think people have this mental model of the process that people are following, but maybe they've never actually taken the time to talk to the lawyer that's doing this analysis. And the lawyer says, I have so much to get through. I know you've got 12 points on your checklist. I'm doing these 3 because if you want me to do any more than that, we're not going to hit our numbers. And I think in a lot of cases, this is where AI really gives you a way out where you've maybe built yourself in with some unsustainable business practices.
Yeah. And actually, I was speaking at the investor show last week, and I was talking to a guy. He's actually a private equity guy, and he was raving about Jarvis, which is I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's an AI tool for copy and for books and for anything. You can put anything through it. And he was saying it is fantastic. He's a very, very good writer, a very articulate guy and smart. And he said, he's been using this this application. He said he's just amazed by what comes out.
Very cool.
Yeah, and it's funny because I've mentioned it to people that I know and said, "Look, we should try this thing." "Oh, no, nothing replaces the human brain, and you can't outsource creativity," and all of those kind of things. But personally, I've heard brilliant things about it.
I think that I think that you're right on a lot of those sentiments, but I also think that it's sort of a limited view, right? As you've sort of said, right? It's not an either or, because I think they're right. You can't outsource creativity, but it's also important to realize that's not what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
You're helping the creative process move more quickly, move more effectively. I mean,
Yes.
even to get, very, very literal, if folks want, some pretty pictures to Google, because I'm always a fan of pretty pictures. There's this field called neural style transfer. Or maybe it's not even fair to call it a field. It's a problem, right? It's a cool thing that we figured out how to do a couple of years ago. And what it allows you to do is take an image and extract sort of the artistic style from it. So you can say like Starry Night or something. And you can then apply that style to a completely new image. So, they're kind of like crazy Instagram filters, right? Where you can take a picture of your dog and say, what if my dog were driven in the style of The Scream, right?
Oh.
Or the style of Starry Night, right? Or the style of The Potato Eaters, right? And you just think about how powerful that kind of a tool is from an artistic perspective.
Oh,
Something
yeah.
that you really had no concept of even a couple years ago.
Yes, that's a really important point because, as you said, it means that we can all become creators and artists, and we can all express ourselves without necessarily having to go through that learning process because we're really being enabled by the technology. And that's the thing that is just so exciting. It's exciting for me to be able to go on Canva and play with Canva, which is something I didn't have to learn how to be a graphic designer, which I would have had to have done 15, 20 years ago, and this is almost like an extension of that. So I agree with you. It's really exciting.
Yeah, I think, everything that we can do, I think, to make this technology more accessible, right? I think that's the thing that, I think Canva's, the great example. Like you said, it's a lot of the stuff that previously, because there was so much work required just for the basic setup, just getting started, right? It's
Yeah.
so labor intensive. How would you do it otherwise? And I
Yeah.
think that now, a lot of this stuff can be had, in a much more accessible way. And I think that really is the promise. And, maybe it'll be a little while before some of these more modern AI solutions, trickle down to the consumer. But, I think even in the short term, seeing, hey, these loan applications, these ACHs, right, that used to take weeks, right, and there would always be mistakes being turned around, instantly, right. I think you start to see sort of the whole enterprise world that people have to interact with just performing better, and then eventually, right, you see that in your everyday life.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. I knew this was gonna be a great discussion.
I'm happy to hear it. You think it's interesting. I certainly, I'm
Yeah.
not biased at all, but yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating. It's very fun to work on every day.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's get on to this whole business about fundraising, if that's okay with you, Slater,
Absolutely.
because you've just been through a $22 million Series B fundraise. So that is really exciting because that's a lot of money, isn't it? $22 million. Um,
It felt like a lot more money before I had it.
Yeah, but, congratulations, it's a really big
Thank you.
deal. It's a big deal, to get to Series B. So, sometimes I have these discussions with other, tech people or investors or whatever, but it's always worth just going through the investment journey. And how did you start? Did you bootstrap or did you get some, capital right from the very start? And what was the Series A money used for? Where did you get it from? And all of that kind of investment journey, I think people find it fascinating.
Totally. Yeah. So, been around for 7 years. As you can imagine, we've been through a few twists and turns in our fundraising journey. And we were students, right? We didn't have any money, frankly, to bootstrap, right? I think that in a lot of ways, I mean, depending on your path, it's a bit of a luxury to not take any kind of salary. But we did. We were in school, so we were able to at least buy ourselves some time with that. So the very first money that we got in was from Rough Draft Ventures. And actually, we didn't want to pitch at all. To us, this was just a side project. This was something we were doing for fun. Occasionally, we might do some contracting work, right? But we started to build this product, and our friend kept telling us, this is great, this is great, this is great. You should really pitch it. And we're like, no, give us a couple weeks, give us a couple months, right? Maybe next year it'll be ready. And then she just says one day, the partner's here. She's going to be in that room in 15 minutes. And if you don't show up, you're going to make me look really bad. And we're like, okay, gosh. All right. Well, I guess we've got a pitch now. And so we did, and, kind of the rest is history, so to speak. And eventually, we got $20,000 from Rough Draft Ventures, which is a student focused fund. And $20,000. It's obviously it's not a lot of money for a startup. Certainly compared to where we are now. They call it pizza money, and I think that's accurate. But that was exactly what we needed at the time, was pizza, right? And which is to say, it's just it's paying yourself the absolute technically less than the minimum wage, right? And just to kind of survive for a summer, with kind of food and rent and whatnot, right? And that's
Yeah,
kind of what
without
that was
without
for.
having to go and get a job.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So that you can really do this full time, right? And maybe, have an intern or two, right? And that's exactly what we used it for. And so for kind of a year, I would say we just used that sort of money. And then we got into Techstars. So that was enough. We kind of built far enough, fast enough on that kind of $20,000 to get enough traction to get into Techstars, which then, there's sort of another chunk of money that comes along with that. And at that point, actually, we were still in school. And then going through Techstars, we took a leave of absence, and then we started to get some more traction through Techstars. And that was when we sort of came to the head of, are we going to raise a seed round or not? So we had some really, really good metrics. We just had sort of a free sort of open source kind of platform at that point. We had a lot of people sort of downloading it that really sort of liked the product that we were putting out there for free. And then we raised a $3 million seed round, at which point we realized we probably weren't going back to school. So I'll take like a breath there. That's obviously, there's quite a few more stages to the journey, right? But that was kind of a big maybe stopping point. If you've got any questions you want to ask on that first chunk.
Yeah, so that $3 million, what did you actually use it for?
Yeah, I mean, the goal really of that, seed round, right? That $3 million was, let's try to get to a product that's got a real semblance of product market fit, right? The ultimate goal was, we want to get an engine where we can say, hey, put X dollars in at the top, right? And that's going to turn into X dollars in revenue down at the bottom. Um, can't really get there. At least, we couldn't really get there in a seed round, right? What it ended up being mostly about was a lot of the go-to-market strategy still going to be things that don't really scale, right? Not really going to have a demand gen pipeline that's completely ironed out or totally repeatable yet, right? If you think about, I think today, sort of the goals of a seed round, right? It's going to be getting to 1 million, 2 million in ARR. And a lot of that, it's going to be, hunting and pecking, right? It's going to be, cold calling. It's going to be, the C-suite, right? And the founders, right? Going door to door and saying, hey, look, are you going to buy our stuff? Because, at least in the enterprise land, right? 1 to 2 million ARR, right? You're talking, maybe 10 customers, right? And that's something that, you're just going to get in ways that don't scale. And then I
Yeah.
think it's a question of having different pieces of kind of this whole scalable engine set up as you kind of progress on there from A and beyond. But I think coming into the A, you really do want to have this very crisp notion that, like, all right, maybe we don't know how to distribute it really widely, right? Maybe we don't know who's going to upsell themselves the fastest, but we have a thing and people buy the thing and like the thing and it works for them, right? And you just really need to get to that point.
Yes, because that's proof of concept really, isn't it? And as you said, product market fit, because if people are buying your stuff, then it's proof that there's a demand.
Yeah, and I really love that you use the word proof of concept there, because I think that people have really different definitions of that. Because you're right, it is proof of concept for the business, right?
Yeah.
And something that I often say, people sometimes ask, oh, you were an engineer, how did you make the leap over to entrepreneurship? And what I say is that, well, an engineer is someone who goes from idea to reality. I say, very, very broad terms, that's what an engineer is. It's the art of making things into like a real physical thing. And I say entrepreneurship is really the truest form of engineering in that
Mhm.
you're still doing the same thing. You're still going from idea to reality. It's just that you don't stop at a prototype, right?
Yeah.
And where a traditional sort of, more maybe narrow engineer might say that a prototype, right? That's their proof of concept, right? Yes. For an entrepreneur, I think that's right, is that product market fit, really, that's the proof of concept.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you draw an analogy between your engineering background and your entrepreneurial journey, because I often think I actually have a creative background. So I started
Mm,
my career as an art director. I wasn't a graphic designer, but I did run a brand identity and a graphic design agency. So,
very
and
cool.
that was my background. I did do that, and I often entrepreneurship is a creative journey, and that's one of the reasons why I love it, because there's constant decisions that have to be made, and I feel that that is a
Absolutely.
creative process.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm going to take this a step further, right, and say that entrepreneurship is a creative process. Being creative is a technical process, and also being an engineer is a creative process, right?
Yeah.
And I believe that very, very firmly. I mean, we have designers on our engineering team, right? Is basically like that's how we think about it from an org structure perspective, right?
Yeah.
Because and I sort of I often struggle with the notion of are you technical or not, right? Because I think that there's really fuzzy boundaries there. I think it's kind of an arbitrary distinction, and I think people tend to maybe put themselves on the wrong side of that line often.
Yeah. That's very, very interesting, and I think people like certainty, don't they? So they like to put other people in a box, don't they? Of course.
Mm,
But as you said, tech is life. I mean, it's certainly a part of my life every single day. I have to improve my tech skills, and I actually think I'm better than my own children now, even though they grew up with them. So,
wow.
it's just one of those things, isn't it? It's part of life.
Well, absolutely. And, like, a UX designer is going to be in certain domains dramatically more technical than me, right? Because if you drop me in Photoshop, I'm not going to know what to do. I'm going to be lost like a little child at Disney World, right? Whereas, like and and that I think is reasonably technical. Like that is a lot of really technical tools that person knows how to use that I don't. So yeah, so that's why I think it's a little bit arbitrary. I'm more I like the term technically non-technical,
Mm.
because I think that that applies very much. I
Technically non-technical, I like that.
yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about this 22 million. I want to get onto that,
Oh yeah, yeah,
Slater. Yeah,
absolutely.
find out what are you
Into the
gonna spend
future.
it on?
Yeah, so the Series B, right? If we kind of take that step forward, so Series A is saying we've got product market fit, we're really setting this go to market together, and B is this question of okay, we're figuring out the problem of scale, right? So it is really for us about getting that really clear notion of okay, we've got money coming in the top of this business. Right, actually, I would say even previously, we've got this notion of okay, today here's where the money goes in, right? And here's what comes out in terms of revenue. And then really for us, the question of the Series B is, okay, great. Now we've got, our 10 stages, let's say, in between there. And now we've got enough data to figure out, okay, where is that working? Where is that not working? And the whole art of the Series B is us really figuring out, okay, not only do we have to change every part of that process from something that, say, the CEO or the CTO is doing to something that, just a more, an employee is doing, right? To someone, we can train someone now to do that role. But also, we've got to kind of test each of those stages for, hey, which one is leaky? How are we doing compared to benchmarks? Where are we doing really well? Where are we maybe not doing so well, right? And I would say the Series B, you don't necessarily have to solve all of those problems, right? I think,
Mhm.
coming out of the Series B, we probably expect that while we'll have made a lot of progress and we're going to have that clarity, there's still going to be sort of a couple key things that say, hey, this stage of the pipeline, we really want to innovate that into the next round. And, we're going to, it's going to be a, much better business after we're done with that. But it is, I think, really about getting that clarity and that transparency and making sure that every role is something that you actually know how to train people how to do that. You don't need, again, the CEO to be on every sales call.
Yeah, so a lot of it is about, scaling, systemizing, putting that turning that what you've got now into an engine of growth.
Absolutely, that's absolutely right. And there's it's a difficult thing, right? And hopefully, you'll have some parts of it that have already been systematized going into the Series B. But really coming out of the Series B, every piece of that go to market strategy needs to be well systematized.
Yeah. So Slater, now that you're into this phase, do you have any advice for tech startups or for people who are early stage in terms of their investment raising journey? What would you say? What's the most important thing for them to take into consideration?
There are a lot of things, but I think that today, I think the most important thing is to approach fundraising with the right mindset,
Mhm.
which is to say that fundraising is not a success in and of itself, right? I think a lot of people, especially early tech founders, they hear these crazy rounds. They're like, and I certainly felt this way. I'm like, oh man, if I could raise $20 million, that would be success, right? I'd have no problems anymore. I could do everything that I want. And I can tell you, it's absolutely not the case. It doesn't matter how much money you raise. There's always going to be stuff that you want to do that you can't, right? You're always going to have to make these hard decisions. So I think that instead, realize two things. Number one, an investor is looking for an investment just as much as you want money,
Yeah.
right? It's a mutual conversation. You're trying to find a mutual fit, right? And you should approach it as such, right? So that's the first thing. I think the second thing, recognize that in a certain way, raising money is always an admission that you couldn't quite get to the next stage without it, right? So think about it almost as a loss in some ways rather than a victory. If you can say, hey, can we get there without raising that money,
Yeah.
right? And obviously, Indico, we've raised a bunch of money because there are a lot of things that we want to do because we're in a really, really hot industry, right? We've got to play for market share, right? We've got to move more aggressively than maybe we would otherwise, right? You need capital to do that, to kind of run really, really fast. But realize, that's a conscious decision that you make. I always joke, people say, oh, is Indico profitable? I'm like, no, of course not. Like, we've decided not to be. But if we wanted to be profitable, oh, we could be profitable tomorrow. It would just be the stupidest thing we ever did, right? Like, you're gonna fire everyone and we'll be insanely profitable for, a week until everything comes crashing down. So,
Well, yes, and that's a really important point that I think a lot of people don't understand, that some of the biggest and the most successful tech companies in the world, like Uber and Spotify, are not yet profitable, are they?
I think that investment has changed a lot. Getting your unit economics right, that's still very important. Like, you have to have a business model that makes sense. But in terms of bottom line profit, I think people just care a lot less. I think they're a lot more revenue focused now, right?
Mhm.
It's interesting. It's this question of world domination power more than just producing money. Because again, I think that it's strange in today's economy. Certainly, money is extremely accessible, right? Like, you can get access to plenty of money. The issue is actually figuring out where to put the money, which is kind of weird. It's not how we usually think about it.
Yes, yes, I think so, definitely, and, it's very interesting. Most of what I do, I have another business that I work in real estate, so
Mm.
obviously in that industry, the investors are very specific. They want very specific things, and
Hmm.
people often
Hmm.
say to me, "Well, do you have any investors that they would be interested in investing in my business, or they'd be interested in investing in tech?" And then I know guys who are like tech investors, and they're very into the tech, and they're building tech groups and tech businesses, and they're not interested in real estate because it's just not what they do. It's, I think as an investor, you get a certain appetite for the thing that you know and understand,
Absolutely.
and then you kind of just you operate within that space as well, don't you?
Yeah, and for your particular space, there's probably a real limit and really compelling opportunities. I'm exactly that way. I invest, right? And on the tech side, right, I only want to invest in a really deep tech company where I know
Mhm.
that the AI is really important to them and I can help, right? Because frankly, investing is really complicated. A lot of people do it for their life. I'm not going to do that. So the only way I know how to bet, and this is, I guess, a very kind of entrepreneur mindset, is I only know how to bet on myself. So I'm going to bet on areas where, like, I know that I can add value, because then I feel like I'm betting on myself in a certain way, right?
I actually really love that perspective because I think any good investor is, to a certain extent, they are betting on themselves because they're betting on their own knowledge and wisdom and judgment, really, because a lot of it is about that, isn't it?
It is. It absolutely is. And that's why I think the mutual fit piece is so key, right? Is
Yeah.
you want to be coming with sort of a rarefied view that not a lot of people agree with. And then you find the person that agrees with that, and then you both have that kind of moment, right? Our CEO likes to use the analogy, investing, it's not like sales. You actually don't really care about your conversion rate in investing. It's more like dating, in that you only need to be successful once. Uh,
Yes.
uh, and then it's like a marriage afterwards, right? Is you're with that person for certainly longer than just the one company.
Yeah, so what was it that about your investor or your group of investors that just, gave it that click?
I think that we made some mistakes early on trying to work with the biggest names that we could possibly find. And we
Yeah.
realized that it's actually a lot more important to work with good, smart people that you get like a good vibe from, frankly.
Yeah.
Because, like, there's never going to be a problem when things are going well, right? When your
Yeah.
company is, like, on top of the world, right? You're going to raise money from whoever, like, whoever your partner is. It doesn't really matter. It's when
Yeah.
things are going badly, right? Or when things start to go sideways, when things are tough, right? And things are going to get it tough at some point. That's really what matters, right? You want the person that's going to, dig in their heels and help and support you, right? And get the person that you want to be in the trenches with. And I think
Yeah.
I wish that I had made the decision that way from the start.
Yeah, and I think that comes with an understanding of investors, and I also think it's the same in real estate because really it's a business partnership. When you take away this thing of, "Oh, they've got money and we haven't got money and they're giving money to us," and all of that kind of weird stuff, really, it is as you said, a collaboration, and they have a need and you have a need that happens to match. And beyond that, it is to do with that chemistry, that fit, and those values as well, isn't it?
That's exactly right. And yeah, and the values are really important, and you should be vetting your investor just as hard as they're vetting you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's fantastic. I've got to say, this has been a really amazing conversation, Slater. So I just wanted to thank you for joining us today on the show. Um, Now, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to find you?
So you can reach out on Twitter, SL8RV, or you can reach me at slater.website or check out Indico at indicodata.ai.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been such a pleasure, Slater, and I wish you every success with Indigo, and I can't wait to see your progress. So keep us posted.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.